Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sir Hunt on X on this 29th of July, 2025, coming to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America, and I hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. Still the hot heat over here in Cincinnati. Basically, you can barely breathe in it. A couple more days of this today and tomorrow. Heat advisory in effect. So those of you around the Cincinnati area, and I also heard parts of other across the United States have a heat wave also. Please stay cool in these treacherous conditions. Take precautionary measures when necessary. Because that's what I'm doing right now. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. Going to get right down to it. Some breaking news over here in Cincinnati. I'll touch on that here in a second. But of course, we start with some summer news that took place overnight in the city of Chicago. It is the passing of one of the premier second basemen, probably in baseball history. Maybe has a strong case for the greatest second baseman ever. We're talking about Ryne Sandberg, aka the Rhino, out of from the Chicago Cubs. Before the Bears and even before Michael Jordan took over the city of Chicago, it was Ryne Sandberg, one of the premier figures in Chicago sports history for his time. We talk about Chicago sports. Ryne Sandberg is always going to be one that's always talked about, especially when we talk about his place in Chicago Cubs history. You're talking about one of the premier second baseman ever. I mean, the accolades speak for itself. 9 Golden Glove awards, 123 consecutive games without an error, which is still the most ever by a second baseman. A, a, a fielding percentage of 989, which was a record for a second baseman at the time. 1984 MVP, 10-time All-Star, 7 Silver Slugger awards, 282 career home runs, which was a record for a second baseman at the time. Part of the 30-30 club for that time. Talking about a player who, for 6 seasons, hit at least 20 home runs, 6 straight seasons. And there was a 30 home run season and a 40 home run season at a time when 20 home run seasons, you were declared a power hitter for that time. And that's what Ryne Sandberg was for that era. And of course, the induction of the Hall of Fame in 2005, having his number retired of the number 23 in Chicago and being a part of the Cubs Hall of Fame. Did retire in 1994, mainly because of the lockout, but did come back after that for a couple seasons. But his peak years were still in the 80s when he was probably the premier second baseman of that time. And of course, if you talk about Ryne Sandberg, you talk about the Ryne Sandberg game that took place on June 23rd, 1984 against the St. Louis Cardinals. That in a game, the same game where standout outfielder Willie McGee hit the cycle. Ryne Sandberg hit 2 home runs in the ninth and 10th innings to basically tie and put the Chicago Cubs over the top to beat the St. Louis Cardinals on that day. When you think about having deficits of 7-1, 9-3, and 11-9, and it was Sandberg with clutch home runs in that particular game to put the Cubs over the top against their National League Central Division rival, the St. Louis Cardinals, and which showed you what Ryne Sandberg was, particularly on the field when he had the bat. One of the premier second basemen of all time. And he's certainly up there with some of the all-time greats. I mean, widely regarded the second baseman of all time is still going to be Rogers Hornsby. I mean, the accolades and career speak for itself, especially going back to the days of the old St. Louis Browns, as well as Chicago and St. Louis. Of course, we had one here in Cincinnati named Joe Morgan. Of course, Jackie Robinson, we know the story with him. Rod Carew, Roberto Alomar, and of course, some of the more modern ones like Dustin Pedroia, Robinson Cano, and Jose Altuve, just to name several of them. Ryne Sandberg is definitely among the all-time great second basemen of all time. His place in history is forever secure. Hall of Famer, case for the greatest second baseman of all time. A lot of people in Chicago will probably go that route because that's their guy, understandably so. Again, everybody knows I don't partake in all-time rankings because I don't know what a set criteria is. But he is certainly in that conversation. A tough loss for the Chicago Cubs and the Chicago sports community. May he and those around him, especially in Chicago, find time and solace for something like this. And certainly a tough loss, not just for the city of Chicago, but all of baseball. One of the more genuine good guys we've had in baseball for quite some time. A standout player he was. My misfortune was I caught him at the tail end of his career after his peak years when he started to hit his downturn, of course, when the Chicago Cubs went into mediocrity with him. But before that, he was certainly a standout second baseman. The numbers and accolades speak for themselves. Definitely all-time great at that position. And speaking of all-time greats at their position, finally, after all this time, the standout from Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, Dave Parker, got his recognition. Officially inducted in the Hall of Fame. It should have been like way before this happened. And I mean, we're talking like way before. I mean, this was like floating with expiration date status because he should have been in there when he was alive and before the Parkinson's disease succumbed to him. And of course, we know what happened not too long ago when he passed. But his resume for a spot in the Hall of Fame itself, I mean, talk about 7-time All-Star, National League MVP in 78. You're talking about a two-time World Series champion in Pittsburgh in 78 and in Oakland in 89. 3-time Silver Slugger winner, 2-time batting champion, 79 All-Star MVP, as well as the RBI leader in 1985. Big productive years, most notably with Pittsburgh, but had some good ones here in Cincinnati with the Reds. It is a crying shame that there had to be somebody that had to give the Hall of Fame speech for him, because that should have been Dave Parker instead of his son. No disrespect, but anyone in the baseball community would tell you this guy should have been in the Hall of Fame long before when he was finally inducted, which took place yesterday. But he finally got his due, and we have to acknowledge that the fact he belonged there a long time ago. One of the premier players in his particular position, one of the real arms. We're talking one of the real arms in that particular position. Google the 79 All-Star game when he threw out 2 runners trying to hustle, and he put balls from the outfield to the catch to home plate almost like to mere perfection with some of the most surreal arm strength I've seen from an arm outfielder. Definitely an all-time great, a guy that should have been in long before he was, and to have success with 2 separate teams the way he did tells you what his legacy was. Not just only, of course, to always be a Pittsburgh Pirate for life, understandably so, but we here in Cincinnati do acknowledge his greatness during his time here, and we do consider him one of the greats to wear a Cincinnati Reds uniform as well. Dave Parker, congratulations. It's been long overdue. It's a crying shame Major League Baseball didn't put you in when you was alive. That should have been you giving that Hall of Fame speech, and that speech you put together for your son to read while you was being inducted was just absolutely beautiful. Those in the baseball community, I would recommend you guys reading it because it was just absolutely outstanding. Well written, but again, it should have been Dave Parker instead of his son, and I don't mean any disrespect to anybody else. And that's more on Major League Baseball waiting too late to put him in when it should have been done a long, long time ago. Even the hardcore baseball historians will tell you that. Terrific players, Sandberg and Parker. If you're into historian sports, especially in baseball, must read about not just great players, but great humanitarians off the field. Both of them are. Now to some breaking news that broke here in Cincinnati. And I told you all, it was going to happen. Trey Hendrickson is going to be in camp tomorrow. He's flying from Jacksonville to Cincinnati. But before everyone goes crazy over what they expect to take place, let me remind you guys, this isn't about just him working out with the team. The guy was being fined $50,000 a day for missing it. And because he was going to likely miss preseason games, it was going to cut into his annual salary. And as a result, that's why he's going to be at camp tomorrow. He's more than likely going to be a hold-in and probably just going to be there and just don't do anything simply because they're still going to try and get a deal done, which I said I expect a deal to be done at some point this season, probably hopefully before the start of the season, but it might linger into the season. But that's what we have here in Cincinnati with Trey Hendrickson. He's finally going to be here. Of course, per usual, the Bengals fans and the super fans are acting like, we told you so, that he's going to be a part of it. Chill out for a second. Why? Because he's only there because, as Marshawn Lynch would eloquently say, he's only there so he doesn't get fined. Because he was being fined $50,000 a day for missing since training camps opened. And basically now with this being, I think it's like day 4 or 5 of the Bengals training camp, I can't remember which, the dollars were starting to add up. And as a result, that's why he's booking a flight from Jacksonville to Cincinnati to be a part of the training camp. And that is why he's going to be there. I still think a deal will be done between him and the team. He's not going to let that part of that base salary be a part of the fines he was going to be forced to accept had he missed more games. That's what happened, and that's what happened at the end of the day. He's going to be there. Of course, we know how terrible the Bengals defense was last season, but it was with him. Now, let me remind you, if he does play this season, which he more likely will, probably going to go from 32nd to 31st. That's not really saying much. Of course, there's a lot of reasons for it, but it doesn't help the fact that this guy decided to do what he did. And of course, he's going to come back. He's just going to sit and observe while everything takes care of itself. Remind you, last year, Ja'Marr Chase did the exact same thing. He basically was waiting for a contract, did a hold in till it's time to play the game, and that's what he did. I expect Trey Hendrickson to do the exact same thing until the deal is done, which I think it will be. But, we'll see how that goes. We know how the duel is going on between the Bengals management as well as Trey Hendrickson and his agent. He wants to be paid in the category of a Max Crosby and Danielle Hunter. I mean, he's not going to get the Myles Garrett, TJ Watt contract because that's a different level. But I expect him to be paid at some point. I expect him to be a part of the team. I don't expect him to do anything much this training camp until something is done, which I think it will. So everyone needs to chill out. It doesn't mean we're getting closer to a deal. Doesn't mean we're farther away from a deal. All this means he's doing his due diligence to report to camp, to do as what Marshawn Lynch would eloquently say, avoid being fined, because that's what this is all about at the end of the day. I still think a deal will eventually going to be done, but I'm not going to take the celebratory route like a lot of the Bengals fans are, because nothing is going to be accomplished out of this. Trey Hendrickson's just avoiding to lose money because he's already lost quite a bit holding out. I mean, so what happened with Shamar Stewart, and that contract got signed, and we know what happened with the deal at the end of the day. I expect something like that with Hendrickson. Actually, smart route will probably be a 2 or 3 year deal because he's going to be 31 as the season starts. I get why the budgeting that's going on for both sides. For Hendrickson being 31, probably his last big deal he's going to try and get, and he wants to get it here in Cincinnati. But from the Bengals front office point of view, it's largely because the guy's 31 years old, and they're probably going to rechange their defensive mechanisms. I mean, when they got him in 2020 for the deal he got, they got him on a bargain because he was one of the more sought-after free agents at the time, at least perception-wise. And I remember the day when he got him, I was very shocked that he signed here. But ever since he's been here, the guy's been absolutely productive. 3 of the 4 seasons here, he's had 10 seasons of at least 14 sacks. Of course, the last 2, 17 and a half. The only exception was 2022, but he got beat up a little bit because the defense, not named Trey Hendrickson, basically just hung him out to dry, and he did all the dirty work for him. But don't go crazy yet, because we have to wait for a deal to take place. It's likely going to be a hold-in, although I wouldn't be surprised either way. Who knows? But likely will be a hold-in until something is done, just like what happened with Ja'Marr Chase last year here in Cincinnati, and that's what I fully expect. He will be here in Cincinnati. I told everyone this was going to happen. Everyone going all crazy over it. No, he's not. He's not bending the knee to the Bengals front office, because the only thing this was all about was avoid losing his money. That's all it was. Are you talking about losing $50,000? I think somebody pointed, had he continued to hold out, the dollar would have surpassed close to $900,000 had he continued to hold out with the fines, which now NFL teams are allowed to do. But that's what happened at the end of the day. So he'll be there. What he does, we'll find out soon enough. It does it necessarily mean a deal is close? Probably not, because I'm not ready to make that assumption yet. I'm not an insider for the Bengals front office. I'm just analyzing everything I see and read. So that's what I'm going to assume at this point. A lot of people are, of course, people trying to ask every question in the book in the Cincinnati community, which right now they should be worried about what took place Saturday night in the heart of Cincinnati, and they're worried about what Trey Hendrickson does. But they're Bengals fans. What do you expect? They don't care about any other human being on this planet Earth. But that's another subject for another day. But Hendrickson is coming. He will be here. Whatever he does, that's on him. Now, of course, today, being training camp, the pads are on for most of the teams. But, of course, the misfortune is everybody getting hurt at this time of year, which you don't want. Kansas City, of course, having Sky Moore, Hollywood Brown, and Xavier Worthy, I guess, limp off the field earlier. My guess is Worthy and Brown will be fine. Don't know much about Sky Moore, but they have enough receivers. They should be fine. Isaiah Likely, If you're a fantasy guy, if you have Isaiah Likely in your roster, you might want to be panicky a little bit because a high ankle sprain that's declared as moderate may be a problem. One of the premier targets for Lamar Jackson out there. So, and of course, another one's, of course, Malik Neighbors with his shoulder, but I think he's going to be fine, just largely because he's the only receiver that's going to get all the targets for the Giants this season. Question is, who's going to be the quarterback that's going to throw them to him? Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, or Jackson Dart? I mean, he's going to get all the targets because there's no number 2 over there in New York, and they're going to be throwing them all over the place. Dalton Kincaid, but basically been injury plagued, going his collegiate years at Utah. But what do you expect? Josh Allen's top target over there. So fantasy owners might as well be on pins and needles a little bit, especially when you talk about Isaiah Likely, because he was a good one last year for you guys. I think he'll be fine by the season starts, but we know how John Harbaugh is over there in Baltimore. I'm not even going to give him the time of day, but that's all the craziness when it comes to fantasy time. I'm not a fantasy player, just so everybody knows, I'm not a fantasy player, but if you want me for fantasy advice, I can give it to you the best I can, because I know I do better at giving advice than playing anyways, because the one time I played fantasy, my goodness, I said to myself, never again. So that's how it's going to be. Sheesh. I don't know how the hell you guys play fantasy the way you guys do, because it's so much ins and outs, backs and forths. I tried it a couple times when this whole thing started way back when. I fared miserably. I can help you guys. If you want to come to me for fantasy help, I can give it. Tell me the league. Tell me who you want to talk about. I'll bring it up the best I can. End of story. But season is coming close. If you want fantasy advice, I'll give it. Now to the world of boxing. And of course, I'm going to touch on the real historical part for a minute, but I'm going to touch on a more recent historical part because my favorite subject, and a lot of them in the boxing community, especially on my side, is having the time of our lives today. This took place 2 years ago at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. It was Terence Crawford methodically breaking down and systematically destroying Errol Spence Jr. to become the undisputed welterweight champ and ascend to a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. We all try to tell everyone affiliated with the PBC brand and Errol Spence Jr. fans this was going to happen. Straight back 5 years before this, the meeting in the parking lot where Terence Crawford pulled up on Errol Spence Jr. with Bob Arum as his promoter at the time, basically calling for a fight to Errol Spence Jr.'s face in front of all of his people, or whatever they want to call themselves over there, basically saying, I want it. If you think you got it, come get it. Basically pounding his body, and Errol Spence Jr. just sitting there, basically clueless on what is going on. For 5 years, this was the fight Terence Crawford wanted because he wanted to be the undisputed welterweight champ. Spence was busy sitting on all of the belts. And basically what happened at the end of the day, when he got him in that ring, after all kinds of thrashing by the Errol Spence fans and the Errol Spence Jr. management team, all of the slander that was going on, Terence Crawford finally got him, got to the dollar price he wanted, dragged him into MGM Grand Arena 2 years ago today, and just gave him the beating of his life to where Errol Spence Jr. is officially irrelevant, and his fan base has become one of the 3 worst fan bases in sports history. The other 2 being the Bengals fans here in Cincinnati and my Tyson fans of the 80s. But we told you guys, everyone affiliated with this fight, we told you guys in the PBC and the Errol Spence Jr. brand, this was going to happen. Because we see it all the time in the sport. When one fighter gets the fight they want, and while the other guy continues to run and hide, when one fighter gets the fight they want and they want it for the longest time, they'll perform better than expectations. And that's what Terence Crawford did. And I said all along, it was going to be a wipeout. The only thing that was surprising out of me is it took as long as it did. It ended in like 8th and 9th round. I can't remember which, because I thought it would end sooner than that. But it goes to show why the difference between good and great. Errol Spence Jr. was good. I'll give him that. He went undefeated and won 3 belts for a reason. Terence Crawford was great going back to his days as a lightweight when he went overseas to beat Ricky Burns. And he had greatness right in front of him, and he's milked it. And he did it on this day 2 years ago today. And I've said this before when it comes to this whole PBC brand, it was broke forever. It started breaking during the Deontay Wilder Tyson Fury trilogy. Everybody knows what the story with that one. when basically the second and third fights, Fury just punked Wilder from start to finish. And basically the capper was what took place 2 years ago today in Las Vegas when Terence Crawford just beat the bejesus out of Errol Spence Jr. Actually, the only thing he didn't do was kill the guy, and Mike got another round or two. He probably might have. Now, here's where I'm going to have a lot of fun with this, especially with you Errol Spence Jr. fans who are just the biggest bunch of whiny, useless basement hags living right now. You guys say he had a detached retina? Guess who else had a detached retina in his career? The great Sugar Ray Leonard. What did Ray Leonard do? Beat Marvin Hagler after it. Beat Donnie Lalonde after that to win 3 world titles in 3 weight divisions. So Sugar Ray Leonard was fine after his detached retina. You guys say he had an accident? Guess who else had an accident? Tim Witherspoon. He had an accident prior to his fight with Andres Eklund. We saw what happened on the USA Network, the overhand right, and Andres Eklund went down like a telephone pole being chopped. So spare me your excuses as to why Errol Spence Jr. lost to Terence Crawford. He lost to Terence Crawford for one simple reason. He was never in Terence Crawford's league. Never was, never has been, never will be. And that's the end of the conversation. You can make all the excuses all you want. And all you Errol Spence Jr. fans that wants to tell us to stop with Terence Crawford in this fight, why aren't we stopping? Because you guys slandered us. You guys slandered Terence Crawford. You guys slandered his family for 5 years, trying to say Terence Crawford wasn't worthy of a title shot. Don't think for 1 second Terence Crawford was taking notes prior to that fight that took place 2 years ago in Las Vegas when he gave Spence Jr. the beating of his life. Now it's our turn to give you guys what you deserve. Karma is coming at your door, and guess who's going to be one of them coming after you? This guy talking to you right now, because I told you guys 5 years ago this was going to happen. There's a reason why Errol Spence Jr. ducked it. There's a reason why the coward Hal Heyman ducked it. There's a reason why Leonard Ellerby, the bald-head-looking Papa Smurf-looking reject that he is, he ducked it. There's a reason why the fight was ducked, because we saw what happened 2 years ago today in Las Vegas. Errol Spence Jr. was never in Terence Crawford's league. I don't care what his record was. I don't care how many. He could have 2 belts. He could have 3 belts. He could have 20 belts. He could have 20 shoelaces. He could have 15 hats. It doesn't matter. He was never in Terence Crawford's league, plain and simple, and it was showed 2 years ago. I don't care about the detached retina. I don't care about his alcohol problems. I don't care about how many car accidents he has, 1, 2, 10, or 20. He was never in Terence Crawford's league, and it was shown 2 years ago today. And you guys can cry all you want. You guys make all the excuses that you want. The result is there. Terence Crawford does it off Errol Spence Jr. like it was the most effortless thing he has ever done. And they can fight 20 more times before, 20 more times after. You're going to get the same results 20 more times. Why? Because one fighter was just barely enough to be good. The other one was a great. That's all it is. I mean, I swear, and I thought my Tyson fans and Bengals fans, with their excuses were bad. Errol Spence Jr. fans are in that same boat, and they're still doing it 2 years later. I mean, don't think for 1 second Terence Crawford saw all the slandering that was done by Errol Spence Jr. fans and the PBC fanboys, because there was a lot of slandering going on toward Terence Crawford, and I mean a lot of hardcore slandering, because they acted like Crawford didn't deserve a shot. Well, problem was, you had the 3 belts. Crawford had the other belt. How do you become great? You want to put the word undisputed next to your name. That's what Terence Crawford wanted to do. Errol Spence Jr. didn't. And because Terence Crawford did, he gave Errol Spence Jr. the beating of his life. And basically, honestly, I didn't think Terence Crawford didn't do enough. I thought he should have done more to that guy to break that fan base even more. I swear, I've always said, the most girly men in the sports fan base of all right now is Errol Spence Jr. fans. I mean, forget Mike Tyson fans. A lot of them are gray beards and have oxygens inside their nostrils and sitting in wheelchairs right now. And forget Bengals fans in Cincinnati. That's a different category. Errol Spence Jr. fans are the biggest bunch of girly men walking God's green earth because of the excuses they use. And they're still going to continue it. I'll say this for the event. It had an 80s, 90s feelish for when you talk about undisputed championship between 2 undefeated guys. It was a hell of an event. It was a hell of an event because it was like an 80s feel when you talk about the undisputed welterweight championship. We talk about 2 undefeated champs, the caliber of those two. They did a heck of a job building it up as almost like an 80s feel. And the crowd that night had an 80s feel to it. I mean, that's what Spence and Crawford did on that night. But it was a performance of perfection. Maybe the closest thing I've seen to it was when Bernard Hopkins disposed of Felix Trinidad in 2001, when he became the undisputed middleweight champ under the same circumstances. But what Terence Crawford did to Errol Spence Jr. was the closest thing to perfection as you're going to get. They can fight as many times as they want. Errol Spence Jr. would never be in Terence Crawford's league. Sorry, Errol Spence Jr.'s fans. You can go ahead and keep your whining, keep your crying, keep being the bunch of girly men wearing skirts. It doesn't matter to me. Because I told you 5 years ago that was going to happen. And it officially happened 2 years ago today in Las Vegas. That's why Terence Crawford is a top 5 pound for pound fighter in the world. And speaking of the welterweight division, basically, probably the most wildest night in the history of the welterweight division took place on HBO 37 years ago today in the Convention Center in Atlantic City. It was a doubleheader. The first one was Lloyd Honeyghan versus Yung Kil Chung and Marlong Starling versus Tomas Molinares. The story with this one, it was billed as double trouble with the two champions, Starling and Honeyghan. Had they won, was going to have a welterweight unification clash, but I'll get to that part here in a second. One of the better fighters to come out of London that nobody talks about enough was Lloyd Honeyghan. Awkward, weird persona out of knowledge, but a solid fighter. Coming off, of course, this shocker over Donald Curry to become the world welterweight champ. Faces a mandatory challenger named Yung Kil Chung. Controls the fight for the first 4 to 4.5 rounds. But as the fifth round started, and basically Honeyghan trying to duck a punch and throw a left hook to the body. It hits Yung Kil Chung low. Yung Kil Chung is on the canvas after the low blow. Everybody in the fight community, you guys know this. This was the first and only low blow that was thrown in the entire fight. There was no warning, no point deduction, no disqualification, rightfully so. And we know the rule on this. Because Yung Kil Chung was unable to recover after only one unintentional low blow for 5 minutes, Lloyd Honeyghan was declared the winner by TKO in the fifth round to retain his part of the welterweight championship. It was a fight he controlled. He was probably going to win this one rather convincingly as it went on. But the circumstances was weird because it raised a lot of questions about what took place on that particular fight. Let me remind everybody again. It was only one low blow. It wasn't something Lloyd Honeyghan was doing throughout the fight. It was basically one accidental low blow where he's trying to go to the body, just hit him in the spot where Yung Kil Chung can't have babies. And basically he was down, flat on his back from a punch that hit him in the spot where he can't have babies. But because it was the only time that happened in the fight, and he was given 5 minutes to recover, and he couldn't recover. And as a result, Honeyghan was rewarded a TKO win under the much crazy circumstances to retain your championship. That's what happened to the first of that doubleheader on HBO. And still a lot of questions about it. But the real bizarre one took place the fight afterwards. It was Marlong Starling against a Colombian fighter named Tomas Molinares. The story of this one here was basically that Marlong Starling held his part after Honeyghan held his. We would have had a title unification between Starling and Honeyghan. But in this particular fight, the style of Molinares gave Starling all it can handle and then some. Then came the wild sequence at the end of round 6 where they traded blows. And then the punch well after the bell by Molinares that hits Marlong Starling on the chin, floors Starling after the bell. He was counted out after the bell. And crazily, Tomas Molinares was rewarded a knockout win in the 6th round for a punch after the bell. This created a whole lot of chaos before, during, and after. Because we know how it is in boxing. Before, during, and after. The question was a punch as the bell was still ringing, or did the bell just go away and the punch was thrown by Molinares to floor Starling? All the replays show that basically the punch was at least 1.5 seconds after the bell rang. Of course, there's a bell vibration that Jim Lampley of HBO tried to circumvent, to act like, find some way to defend it, which he couldn't. Larry Merchant and Sugar Ray Leonard both agree that it was after the bell. But it cost Marlong Starling his championship. But a few weeks later, the respected commissioner named Larry Hazard of the the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board overturned the result to a no contest because of it, saying he had a chance to review it himself. And this event basically now put together what's now known as a 10-second warning, which back then it was the flashing light in the neutral corner, because they didn't have that back then. They now flash a 10-second warning, notifying fighters and the referees and the timekeepers 10 seconds before the round is over. This fight parlayed it for many good reasons, because the whole situation was wild, especially the interview Marlong Starling had with Larry Merchant after the fight, saying I wasn't knocked out or I wasn't knocked down, when the replays clearly showed everything took place at least 1 to 2 seconds after the round ended. And basically, Marlon Starling lost his championship, but the result was overturned to a no contest given the circumstances. But the governing body still allowed Molinares to retain the title. But weeks later, he eventually vacated it given the circumstances around it. But still, we still had the fight between Starling and Honeyghan in February of '89, albeit without two belts. It was only for one belt, the one Honeyghan held because Starling lost his. But Marlon Starling redeemed himself to beat Honeyghan in February of '89 to win the real welterweight championship. But how they got to that point, two real bizarre situations. One guy, because he accidentally hit his opponent in the area where he can't have babies anymore. The guy tried to pull a flop, which that didn't happen. And the other one where a guy gets hit a second and a half after the bell ends, and basically everyone officially called it a victory. At that point, weeks later, it was overturned to a no contest. That's the sport of boxing for you. That's what we always say. I mean, just when you think everything's going to be conclusive, there's something in the way that makes everything inconclusive. And that's what we had here with this doubleheader that took place on HBO 37 years ago in Atlantic City. Lloyd Honeyghan rewarded the win, rightfully so, because it was just one low blow to the area where the Korean fighter Yung Kil Chung could not have babies again. And of course, the second one rightfully turned to a no contest because Tomas Molinares threw a punch 2 seconds after the bell that knocked out Marlon Starling, and he was counted out 2 seconds after the bell ended. But that's the doubleheader. It's on there on the platforms. For you guys who want to see some craziness and bizarreness, watch that doubleheader because it's just absolutely the epitome of what boxing started to become for the longest time. Of course, the adaptation of technology, among many other things, in the 80s started it. And because it took place the way it did, that was how the world saw this bizarre doubleheader night. I mean, supposed to be a Starling Honeyghan showcase. Turned out there was a lot of craziness and bizarreness that took place that night. Of course, we had a lot of bizarreness in Atlantic City and boxing history. I could touch on that on another day. And I conclude with one more. This one took place 31 years ago. A fighter everybody in the fight community still likes to talk about, none other than James Lights Out Toney, scoring a 12th round knockout over Prince Charles Williams with seconds left in the 12th and final round. This fight was the epitome of who James Toney could have been had he stayed disciplined with his habits outside the ring. Inside the ring, you're talking about one of the more skilled fighters to maybe lace him up. I mean, we talk about when Pernell Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez had the distinction of the best fighter pound for pound from 87 and 9 to that point, which Whitaker fully took over. James Toney had a claim to that distinction simply because when you think of the skill level he had, he was as skilled as both Chavez and Whitaker, among many others. I mean, he did some things that the old timers used to do, going back to guys like Archie Moore, Ezra Charles, among many others, especially when you talk about the traditional shoulder roll. But we talk about James Toney and what he did on this particular night. This was a case of James Toney showing the whole world just how great he was and how he could have been had he stayed on the straight and narrow. It was, of course, his last fight before he lost to Roy Jones. And we know one of the causes for that loss was simply because he couldn't stay disciplined outside of the ring, let his weight get out of control, had a weight cut to fight Roy Jones, and basically lose a decision to Roy Jones. Now, I said all along, I thought any version of Roy Jones beats any version of James Toney. No disrespect, but I thought at that point, Jones was going to be something surreal. But James Toney, a terrific fighter. We talk about just pure skill, was as great as anyone in the middleweight and super middleweight division. The problem with him was, I mean, he couldn't keep his weight in check in those weight classes. That's how he wound up ballooning over to heavyweight at some point. But in the middleweight and super middleweight, resume as good as anyone he fought. I mean, talk about Michael Nunn, Iran Barkley, Mike McCallum twice, Prince Charles Williams, Tim Littles, Roy Jones. Didn't duck anyone. Beat basically before the Jones fight, beat everyone. Revenge that draw to McCallum. First fight, which I thought Toney should have eked it out. But that was how great James Toney was and could have been had he stayed on the straight and narrow. But because he couldn't stay on the straight and narrow, that's how he ballooned up to heavyweight. And even though he had mild success when he beat John Ruiz, albeit stripped under bizarre circumstances, to the 2 fights with Sam Peter, of course, beating a 41-year-old Evander Holyfield. His skill at least carried him to a certain point, and until the second fight with Sam Peter, where he was just completely overwhelmed. But James Toney, we talk about old school fighters using old school tactics from back in the 50s and 60s. He was one of the few that did it so genuinely. He was a thing of beauty. I mean, pull up his fight in 1993 against Iran Barkley. I talked about Terence Crawford's fight with Errol Spence Jr. was a thing of perfection. So too is what James Toney did to Iran Barkley in 93. And how he managed to war off Prince Charles Williams, who was doing all he can to hang around in that particular fight to finally knock him out with seconds left in the 12th round, goes to show how versatile and how great James Toney was had he been able to stay on a straight and narrow. Because outside of the ring, the bad habits started to add up, cost him the fight against Roy Jones. Eventually, allowed him to made him go to heavyweight at one point, and that's why he couldn't stay straight. But I said, I got a comment here. What's going on, Pat Fantasy Pat? So that's what happened with 32 years ago. We talk about the best fighters pound for pound. James Toney, because of his skill set, was in that conversation. Just on pure skill in that middleweight division, in middleweight history, he was as good as anyone. He just couldn't stay straight out of the kitchen and the bad habits. It caught up to him in the Roy Jones Jr. fight. Now, let me just say this for the record. I don't think James Toney would have beaten Roy Jones in any era because Roy Jones was just supremely athletic before he busted positive for whatever he busted positive for in 2001. But James Toney would have given a much better fight had he stayed disciplined. It was that lack of discipline that caught up to James Toney as the career and fights wore on with him. But he was a thing of beauty in his own heyday. Ugh. A lot of things I could talk about more and more every day if I want to, but I have bigger things to do over the next few days. But football's here, and the NBA training camp should be opening within the next month and a half. Of course, in the middle of the baseball season with playoff races starting to heat up a little bit. Trade deadline, I think, is the day after tomorrow. Don't know what's going to happen with that. A lot of big names being thrown around, but we know how trade deadlines go in all sports. All bark, no bite. So I'll believe it when I see it. And of course, the big news here in Cincinnati was Trey Hendrickson going to be at camp tomorrow. But as I told everyone, y'all need to chill out because he's only there because, as Marshawn Lynch would eloquently say, I'm only here because I don't want to be fined. Because he was getting fined for missing Bengals training camp, that being Trey Hendrickson. That's the only reason why he's there. I predict it's going to be a hold-in until something is fully finalized, which is what I expect to be at some point. Don't know if it's going to be an extension or Trey Hendrickson is just going to kick the bucket and say, I'll just go ahead and go through with it. But something will be done, and I expect it to be done relatively soon because that's what the situation is. And that'll wrap up this edition of Sirhan on X. I hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 29th of July, 2025. For those of you who missed this particular podcast or live stream or whatever you want to call it, the audio versions of this will be uploaded on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, as well as the Spotify platforms. And as I tell everyone all the time, take care of yourself first. Make taking care of yourself first your number one priority in all of life. You take care of yourself first and those around you close to you, good things will come your way. And if you don't, nothing else is going to matter in this walk of life. It's something I had to learn myself as I go along. I will be back at it tomorrow night. But until then, have a good rest of the night. Take care of yourselves. God bless and enjoy the evening.